So now I will officially start. Do not fear the command line. You are smarter than it. My name is Peter Chittum. I lead the developer evangelist team in the EMEA region. Even though I don't sound like I'm from EMEA, that's where I live right now. My contact information is on there, as well as my Twitter handle. I'm also, on the lead up to Dreamforce, I owned the developer track. So if you've visited a developer track session this week and you enjoyed it, I would love to hear it. If you have feedback, constructive feedback on your developer track session, I would love to hear that too. Because in the end, I led the team that programmed all 300 and some odd developer track sessions. So I'm really excited about what we put out this week. But I definitely want to hear from you too. And the reason I say that is because some of the things that I used on the command line were tools that I used with the Salesforce data that we use to manage our sessions. And so it's very topical for me to talk about this. Of course, we have to talk about this slide. I don't plan on making any forward-looking statements because actually about 80% of my talk is really not Salesforce specific. It's more generally speaking, how do you actually just use a command line tool? How do they work? How do they function? And then toward the end, I'll talk a little bit about some Salesforce DX kind of stuff. And so as far as who I was hoping to have in the room, really it could be any computer user, but primarily Salesforce developers and admins. And part of the reason I designed the talk was because I know that prior to Salesforce DX, we have not asked you to use command line tools really. And now it's becoming part of the solution, part of building a project in Salesforce. So why not help people understand better how these command line things work in general? And then you'll feel more comfortable, hopefully, using Salesforce DX command line, because that's my goal, is to get there. So it looks like I've got who I want in my room, because let me just ask this question. Who here uses a computer for their work? Yeah, of course. So, and you want to use the command line? Yes, and everybody. And you're not sure where to start? Yes, okay, cool. And I also think this is important because I see my laptop as the most important tool that I have. This is what I do my job with. I spend hours a day whiling away time on my laptop, and the better I know how to use it, the better I can do my job, I think. And as far as how this talk is going to go, 40 minutes is not enough time to exhaustively cover everything about command lines. However, we can give you an idea of how they work and hopefully inspire you to understand some of the things that are possible. That's my goal, really. And part of the reason why there's no way we could do this in 40 minutes is because command line user interfaces, and that's what they are, they're a kind of user interface, have been around since the 1960s. And any technology that's been around since the 1960s will be impossible to sum up in 40 minutes, or rather to become an expert in 40 minutes. But like I said, we'll get you some ideas of what's possible. And from that standpoint, I'd really invite you all to just sit back, relax, and watch. If you want to take pictures of some of the things I do on the screen, that's totally cool. But really use this as an opportunity to open up your mind to what's possible, is my suggestion. Toward the end, I'll give you a little taste of Salesforce DX. I've prepped a Scratch org just because I wanted to save some time on the demo. And I want to show something that I think is a really common thing, which is to get some data out of Salesforce, make some modifications, and then push it back into a Salesforce org. And there's all kinds of reasons for doing that, whether you're an admin or a developer. And I want to show you just how amazing the command line can be to make this kind of thing happen. Okay? And do expect some bad jokes. I'm using a Mac. This is material to the discussion because command lines are slightly different depending on the hardware you're using. Mac's default command line shell is called Bash, or Born Again Shell. Let's just say that geeks had some really funny things to name their tools with ages ago. The cool thing is, in Windows 10, you can install Born Again Shell, and you can use it using the Windows subsystem for Linux today. So actually, everything that I'm doing today on my Mac, you can actually do on your Windows system as well, provided it's Windows 10. All right. And I also want to explode this myth that the command line is a scary thing. I mean, who looks at this and thinks, ugh? Right? It looks bad. It's actually quite simple, but it is a lot of characters, and that I understand. And so I think to begin the discussion, it helps to really simplify how command lines work and how commands work. So let's just let's say we have this text file with these foreign names in it, and I need to get these into alphabetical order. What would I do to make that happen if I didn't know the command line? I'd probably copy and paste them into Excel, sort them, and then I'm good to go. I mean, let's face it, 4 names, I could probably just do it by hand as fast as it would take to get to Excel, but let's extrapolate and think 4,000 names, and then, yeah, Excel, sure, that makes a lot of sense, but why would I even bother opening Excel when I can just type sort names.txt and I can have the output just like that? So that's the thing that I'm talking about, is like, God, that's actually really simple to understand. Does anyone not understand what's going on here? See, you're already there. Mic drop, go home, go have a beer, you know. No, it's a bit too early for that. Actually, and I think it's worth just a short demo just to kind of jump right in and take a look at this. So yes, I'm in the right directory. So I actually have a file called names.txt, and this was a file I used recently in my session management process. And part of the thing you need to know is that I use an org in session management that I have 0 admin rights for. In fact, I don't even have API rights for it. I can't import data into this org, but what I can do is I can export a CSV from a report. Woohoo, right? So it's great. I've actually been learning some admin chops after 7 years of being a Salesforce developer. It's been a very cool experience. So let's take a look. If I type ls, that'll show me what's inside of this folder that I'm in right now. And I'll talk more about some of these commands in a moment here. So names.txt, and anyone remember the command? It's really hard to remember. It's sort. And I just did a little shortcut where if I just start to type something that's in my local file system and the command expects a file, and I hit tab, it'll go and find it for me. It auto-completes that. So I get to type less, actually. And there we go. So there's my sorted names. And just to show what that looks like without, there's another command called cat. Meow. It's fun, right? Cat. It actually stands for concatenate. So that's what it looked like before. Okay, so before. And then I could actually use something, I can use the up arrow and I can go back through the history of commands, so I don't need to remember what I did, which is kind of nice too. There's my sorted one. There's my unsorted one. So I can kind of go back and forth between this. I'm going to get into a little bit more because I actually had a purpose for having these names out, but bear with me a moment. Let's go back to the slides. Okay, why aren't the slides automatically popping up? Ta-da! Okay. So it helps to take a step back and understand what is the command line, right? The command line is an app. That's all it is. It's an app that was intended to give more human-readable control to the underlying machine code of your machine, actually. So even though some of the commands you're going to see seem a little bit cryptic, they were intended to be more intuitive. The command line is an app that executes commands, okay? Ta-da! What's a command, though? Well, a command is itself a little app, actually. So the command line is an app that runs other apps. And that's really the main thing that you need to understand as far as what they do, or what the command line is and what commands are. As far as how they work, let's think about what I just did with sort. Sort does this little algorithm. It does a sorting algorithm. And it takes a bunch of text lines and it puts them into a particular order. And so the text in is actually in a file, right? But I can also have something called a stream, which is kind of an in-memory bunch of data, okay? And then the algorithm runs, and then I have some data coming out, and that also comes out in a stream. So the stream in is called standard in. The stream out is called standard out. I can have a file going in as well. And that's basically it. Now, what does this sound like to you? There's actually a feature I would guess everybody in this room has used in Salesforce that's almost identical to this structure here. Think of something in Salesforce where you have some data, you run some functions on that data, and the data comes out in a slightly different format. and gets presented to your users. Does anyone know where I'm going with this? So reports are actually getting the data out, and what's something you can run on your report data to transform that report data? Filters filter out certain data. We're getting there. Where I'm going with this is formula fields. Right? A formula field reads a data from a field, a piece of data from a field. You pass it into a function, and then it changes that data the way that it comes out, or it pulls some data out of that, or it uses some piece of that data. So who here has ever written a formula field? Because if you've written a formula field, you already know everything you need to know about using the command line. That's all you're doing. You're basically doing the same thing that you do in a formula field. You have a little function, that's what your command is. You pass some data in, except instead of a field, it's from a file or from a stream, and then you get some data back out again. Okay, that's mic drop moment number 2. Of course, there's some other things that we need to know about how commands work. There is something called a parameter, and parameters just change how the commands operate. So for instance, in my sort command, I might want it in reverse order. Like I want descending instead of ascending order. So I just pass a parameter in. It still is sorting. It's still doing it alphabetically. It's just doing it in a different order. So I don't need a whole new command to sort in a different order. I just need to tell the command to behave a slightly different way. All right? So makes sense so far? Now here's where it starts to get fun, because you can have, well, one command and then another command after it with a semicolon. Or you can say, execute this command, but only execute this one if there isn't an error. And that's powerful. And then this is where it starts to get familiar again, because you can have one command execute. You can take the data and pipe it to the next command, and then have that command use the new form of the data to do its algorithm on. Has anyone ever nested one function inside of another function? Because that's exactly what's going on here, is I have one function executing, it takes the data that it's transformed, it passes it to the next one, and then it keeps on going down the line, and I can actually stack this together 4, 5, 10 deep if I want to. What's cool about this, though, is that you will never have to hunt down that missing right parentheses. Okay? So this syntax is actually quite a bit more intuitive to make this happen. So let's go back to the the demo, and kind of revisit this. My goal with this was that I had made a change to a bunch of sessions, and my session owners, I had a few session owners I needed to notify. And so I already had the data from this report that I'd exported, but I had this random list of all of these session owner names, and I needed to do a chatter post so that I could go and say, hey, you need to pay attention to this and go help me out with this session, right? So how do I take this gobbledygook of all these names? Well, the first part is that I used sort, right? Now, remember I said pipe? Did anyone know this was called pipe symbol? Did you know why? Well, now you do. Because we're piping standard out from the first one to standard in from the second one. So we pipe the output of names.txt, and let's revisit what that looks like. And I'm going to pipe that to something called unique. Guess what that does? It finds duplicates and it filters them out. And now I have actually a nice simple list of all my names that I want. And I can actually continue the piping, so maybe I just wanted to know how many of my session owners are going to be touched by this. There's another command called word count. It actually counts more than words. In this case, I'm going to tell it with a parameter to count lines. So count the number of lines, and so I know there are 20 session owners, individual session owners, that have to take action on their sessions. And you can start to see how these commands work together. Everyone good so far? Okay. Is anyone already seeing some potential with the stuff that I'm doing? A few of you. Okay, hopefully we'll get all of you or many more of you there. All right. Okay, just a few more things that we'll go through here. Now, instead of piping, I can also do a redirect, and this is how I take the standard out and write it to the file in the file system. Redirect will always overwrite, so if I don't want to overwrite the existing contents of a file, I can also append. So the 2 greater than signs will append to the end of the file name that's specified there. If the file doesn't exist, it'll just create it. So it's a nice option if you're not sure something's there and you just want to create it, or if it is there, you want to append to it, you can use something like this. And so the next demo, I'm just going to go through a whole bunch of file system things, just so you understand that everything that you do already, whether that's in Finder on your Mac or in File Explorer on your Windows machine, there's something that you can do in the command line as well. Okay, so that's the next bit we'll go through. There we go. So the way I set this up is I want to do a little sort of show and tell. So on the right, everyone recognizes what that is. That's Finder. That's my file system in a nice, rich-looking graphical user interface that we're all very familiar with probably. And on the left is the command line. And if you look very closely at the top, you'll see in my command line, it's actually referencing this CLI test right there. And if you look over here in Finder, it's saying, oh yes, you are in CLI test. So I'm looking at the exact same folder in my file system. And if I just want to find out the contents, anyone remember what that was? I did it earlier, it's ls. It looks like that, and I can see there's demo 1, demo 3, play, and revert.csv. If I want more details, I can add some parameters, -al, and then I see more details about what's in the file system. This one here is my file size, but like, is that bytes? Is it megabytes? Is it kilobytes? I can add another parameter, ALH, for human readable, and then I can actually see what those actual file sizes are right there, okay? So each parameter tells me some additional information about what I'm looking for, okay? Now, the next thing I want to do is, let's say I want to have a new directory to work with, and clearly I'm on demo number 2. So I will do, I'll create a new directory, mkdir demo 2. And if you see over there, demo 2 pops up, good to go. And if I want to go into that directory, cd demo, and you'll notice now it's not completing that, and that's because there's multiple things called demo in here. If I hit it a few more times, eventually it'll come up and say, oh, here's all the things called demo, and then I can pick the one that I want. So I want demo 2, there we go. And then I can create a file in there. There's a command called touch that'll create a file, my file, there it is. And then I can say goodbye, remove rm, my file, there we go. So now I can also take text and I can sort of output to the command line using a command called echo. There we go. Oh, hello. Yeah. Now I can also, this is actually just a fun thing in Mac that if you're going to demo the command line, you might try and have some fun anyway. I can do, remember, semicolon, and I do another command, say hello. Hello. Oh, that's what I was doing earlier in case you were wondering, yeah. So it's actually, you know, you can have a little bit of fun with this, and you know, I actually don't need to do hello the second time. Everyone remember what that does, right? Because I can just pipe the output. Hello. And then, you know, it does hello. So there we go. I can also take the output from echo and I can write it to a file. And so we'll call this hello.txt. All right, and you can see there it is, popped up on the right over there. Everyone see that? Hello. Okay, and then I can use cat, again, to read the file. And now we can have some fun. So I'm actually going to go and if I append to the end of hello.txt, oh, it's just a few times. All right, and then I can do cat hello.txt and pipe to say hello, 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 okay, hello. That's a bit much. Although if you want to, you can actually have it speak other languages and accents. So Fiona here apparently is the Scottish version.
Hello, 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 hello.
There you go. That's in honor of my friend Don Robbins here, who's a big fan of Scotland. So yeah, so there you go. It's a bit silly, but you start to get an idea of what's possible. So I've worked with the file system. I've moved from directory to directory. I didn't actually do a move of a file, but it's MV, and then you just specify where it is and where you want it to go to. And then some silliness with the say command. I can actually make it sing. Should we do that one? Anyone want to hear singing? Okay. Good.
Hello, hello,
Isn't that nice? Yeah.
hello, hello.
Yeah, or you can actually have, if you're feeling a bit morose, then you can do the other.
Hello, hello, hello,
So-
hello, hello.
Yeah, yeah. It's good to laugh in a talk like this because otherwise you'll go to sleep. So, cool. Let's go back to the slides. All right, so a few other commands I want to go through, and then I'm going to jump right back into a demo. Alias is really powerful. You can see that these commands can get kind of long, and if there's one of those that you do over and over again, you can actually create a shortcut for it called an alias. It's quite easy to do, and I'll show you this in a moment. We already saw how to read a file and then spit it out to standard out. Anyone remember what that's called? How do we output the file contents? Cat, yes. So, of course, I had to put appy on that slide. There's also a head and a tail, which worked remarkably well for that. Yeah, I can't believe how well that worked. Head reads from the top of a file, and tail reads from the bottom of a file. And tail is really powerful because if a file is actively being written to, you can just open up tail and have it spit out what's going into that file actively into your console. So think of like a log file or something like that. And then there's dog. Actually, there isn't a dog. This is kind of another joke. I had to work in Blaze as well. But if you see, actually, what I'm doing is alias dog equals cat. And then I could do dog, and then it would output my file contents. So you can actually have a little bit of fun here, and that kind of thing. Word count I showed already. Word count counts words, characters, lines, and paragraphs. Those are 4 different things that you can count with word count. So if you wanted to find out, how many rows were exported from a particular report, for instance, you can do things like that. If you want to look for certain files by name patterns, you can do that. If you want to look for contents of files by patterns, there's something called grep, which sounds weird, but it just stands for Global Regular Expression Print. Now, that sounds very complex, but essentially it is look for a pattern. Every line that has that pattern somewhere in it, show me that line in the file. And it's super powerful. I'm going to show you this one in the next demo. And then finally, I want to talk about sed, which is the stream editor. This is where you can modify the contents of the stream in flight. So if you have, I can output a file, I can look for certain lines of that file with values in it, and then I can edit those files. You now have a group of commands that can be a very powerful editor of text and data. Right? So think what you can do with that. In fact, that's where we're going to go next. And let's go to this one. So with this one, I'm going to use the forward-looking statement.txt. And so remember cat, forward-looking.txt, and it's kind of long, so I can say, well, how many lines is the forward-looking statement? Word count minus L. It's 35 lines of text. Maybe that's just too long for me. I'd like a 10-line forward-looking statement. Wouldn't you like that? That'd be better, wouldn't it? The lawyers wouldn't mind at all, would they? So what we can do is we could say head forward-looking.txt minus n5. And then, I got that backwards. Get your syntax right, Peter. So minus n5. Oops. There we go. So I can see the first 5 lines of the forward-looking statement. And let's save that to something called the shorter-looking statement. Okay, and then I'll take the last 5 lines, just, because if they see the first 5 lines and the last 5 lines, they'll probably be okay with it, right? So we'll say tail minus n5, forward-looking, and then there to shorter-looking statement.txt. And now if I cat shorter-looking, then I've got a 10-line forward-looking statement. How cool is that? Oh, you know what I did? Oh, okay. There we go. That one should be fine. But what I need to do is append on that one. That's better. 10-line forward-looking statement, just like that, right? The other thing you can do is, as I said, you can edit text in files. So, for instance, how many lines is the word statement in the forward-looking statement? Anyone ever wondered that? Probably not. But if you do cat forward-looking, and then you do grep for the word statement, grep is going to go look for every line that has the word statement in it. And there we go. And actually, let me clear my screen and repeat that just so it's a little bit more clear. That's better. Now, maybe, I always wanted, maybe I don't want forward-looking statements. Maybe I want forward-looking something else. What should we have instead of statements? Anybody want to guess? Pick something else. Cookies. Oh, forward-looking cookies. After my heart. So what I can do is I can do the stream editor, and I can say substitute statement. Oh, actually, I want to do one thing. I should put that in single quotes. So substitute statement for cookie. Oh, that's going to be good. What do you think? So this presentation may contain forward-looking cookies. That's good. I like it. Now, you notice, though, that it didn't actually catch every instance of that. So there is a way to make sure it gets every instance of a word. So we'll do a G. And that just is global. So look for every instance and replace that as well, okay? So it's a little bit of silliness, but you can start to see, again, if I've got some data, if I've got some text, I can have some really powerful tools to look for stuff inside of that. And in fact, one of the other things I'll just show really quickly, I often had cases where titles would be submitted to me that were too long. All of our session titles are in the name field of a custom object. How many characters are in the name field of a custom object? Anyone? 80, yeah. So I'd get like a title that was 90 characters long, which would then truncate, and I'd have to go back and say, that is too long. And rather than go into like a web page and like count the characters, because I wanted to tell them exactly how many characters they had, I could just do something like echo. This is a really long title that will never fit in a name field in Salesforce. And then I can say word count, characters minus C, and I can say, oh, that's 78. Okay, it's not too long. Now it is too long. Okay, so there we go, right? So never really had to open a web page, and I could go back to my speaker, and I could say, you need to cut this many characters out of your title, okay? All right, so let's go back for the final bit here and talk a little bit about Salesforce and command lines. And that's not coming up, so let me escape out. Exit show. Oh, there we go, now it's back. Okay, so Salesforce DX CLI is generally available as of winter 18, so you can go and download it and install it today. It runs in every type of hardware, so Mac, Windows. It will run in both the native Windows shells, which are called CMD and PowerShell, and also in the Windows subsystem for Linux Bash shell. Finally, it'll run in Linux, of course, but typically Linux users already use the command line, so I don't expect any Linux users in here. Are there any? Oh, okay. Welcome. How am I doing? Okay. So Force CLI is our old command line. This was an open source project, so it was never really an R&D supported feature. And it's been deprecated, so it's been end-of-lifed. If you want to use a command line tool, use the Salesforce DX CLI. That is the way to go, for sure. There is a linter tool. Linters are for static code analysis. If you're writing, in this instance, it's for writing Lightning components. So if you're a developer, this is a great command line tool to have at your fingertips if you just want to really quickly look at a Lightning component and see if you wrote some potentially bad code into it. And then finally, Heroku CLI is our command line tool for managing Heroku applications and instances. So anyone Heroku users here? Yeah, so you're probably familiar with that as well. So let's wrap up with the final demo and talk about Salesforce DX CLI. And I want to get us to this point where we have, something that you can take away that is very specific to Salesforce, that shows you what the power is. And I'm going to stick with the data management stuff, even though that's not really typically super developer oriented. But what I'd like developers to take this is think about you're working in an environment and you're writing some code and you want to test that code over and over based on a certain data set. In the past, what you might have done is written an Apex class that you would then use execute anonymous to then kind of reset your data. The problem with that is you have to take that Apex class and move it to every single org. So imagine if you had a script that you could run that you could just keep on your local machine and check into a version control system that could do your data resets for you. Now that would be cool, right? So imagine that for what I'm about to show you. Okay, and I do have a little helper here because this command gets pretty long and gnarly. All right. Okay, so I did some prep work ahead of time. Because of the amount of time it takes to get a Scratch org on board, we're also running tons of quick starts doing Salesforce DX stuff. I didn't want to have a problem or my Scratch org just decided not to come online. And Comcast has been having a few little network problems I've heard of the last couple of days. So just to take the load off of Comcast and make things easier, I thought I wouldn't worry about building a Scratch org for you. But that's where the start is going here. And I'll walk through what I did. The first thing is, and because Salesforce DX, the idea is that your Salesforce org definition is in your version control system. So I cloned a Git repo. It's a local repo. And I usually do that for demos just because then I don't have to wait for things to download over the internet. And I put it in a folder called df17, okay? And then I changed directory into df17. And then I did a force org create. The -a gives me an alias name for this Scratch org. The -f tells me what is the config file that says what this org should look like. And the -s says set this as the default org for this particular project. And what that means is I can now invoke commands against this org without explicitly saying the org name, which just makes my commands shorter. It just streamlines things a bit, okay? And for those of you who are security and identity minded, what's going on here is we're actually storing an OAuth token in an encrypted data store locally on your machine, okay? So that's what's going on. So it finishes that, and then I say, okay, great, sfdx force source push. This is my metadata deploy. Look how short that is, right? And from the command line, and super easy, anybody can sort that out as far as how that works, right? So all I need to do is have my org set up, my project set up, and it needs to have the right project structure. So there is a Salesforce TX specific project structure. There's a whole lot of metadata that got imported. The important bit is down here, there's a permission set. So that's too far. There we go. So this permission set, Dreamhouse, I want to give myself permission to that so that I can actually see everything for that particular app. And then finally, the last few things that I did. So I assigned that permission set. I then import some data, sfdx force data tree import. A data plan is a tree-based plan of several different objects that may be related to each other. So just one quick command, I've imported data into 2 different objects, and I can do multiple levels of objects, actually. It's pretty powerful. And I can see there's the data right there. So now, if I go to my command line, and I did copy a file here. One of the things I'm going to have to do is append on a header to a CSV. So I have that header file handy. So if I do sfdx force data sockle query -q select ID name status from property _c. And that'll come back. And it actually looks pretty nice in this format. This is human readable, but it's not good for machines. So the machine readable format we use is JSON, actually. Now don't get scared, because I've got a good trick for you here. Oops, it's double minus JSON. And all these parameters are documented in the command line help. So if you do sfdx and then a command and then -- help, it'll tell you how the thing works. And it's really intuitive, especially compared to what I think some of the Unix and bash manual files I think can be a little bit cryptic personally. So that's my data, right? So I actually used a package manager to install a utility called JSONV. And what I'm going to do, let's make sure I'm doing this in the right order. Yes. So I'm going to take JSONV. I'm going to pipe to JSONV. And I'm going to say I want the ID, the name, and the status. Oops. Let's get the right. There we go. Status. C. And those are nested in this JSON. So there's a results object in the JSON, and there's a records object in the JSON. I have to reference those 2 points in order for it to find where it is in all this gobbledygook, okay? Sorry? Do I? Thank you. I welcome help with live demos like this. So thank you very much. So I need to say result dot records. And now I should come back and I should have, there's my results, okay? Notice no header, which is why I have this header CSV file, right? So if I do ls, I can see there's, what I need to do is actually go to data. So cd data, ls. And so I have header.csv there. And it doesn't really matter where I put the output I'm going to do, so I'll just stay in this directory. So now I'm going to say, let's take the same command that I just did, okay? And now I'm going to pipe it to cat. Remember cat, even though I've been using it to read files, is concatenate. And so I can very easily concatenate this header file onto this set of data that doesn't have headers on it, okay? So I say cat header.csv, and I put a placeholder in, and that says, for the second thing of the concatenation, use standard in. Use the data that flows in from the previous command, okay? And we hit enter. And so it spits out the hard-coded CSV straight away, and then it goes and gets the data from Salesforce. And now I've got a readable CSV format that I can work with to put back into Salesforce, okay? Now, in my use case, I've realized that all of these properties, I need to update their status to available, okay? So the next thing I want to do is I want to use stream editor. So we'll pipe again, sed, and then we'll say single quotes. We need to substitute null for, and we need to make sure we put quotes around it, available. So make sure I put the delimiter in, close that off, and now, with any luck, and I just want to say, one thing I could be doing, I could have saved this to a CSV file and just been working with it locally, but I'm trying to make a point here of like, look how cool a real gnarly command can do just in one step. This is actually not something you want to do in your production environment, right? Save a backup before you change data. That would always be a good thing. So make sure you don't do as I'm doing or as I'm about to do. So now that I've gotten to the data that I want to get back into Salesforce, I'm going to write it. So this is going to be my updates.csv. And I'm just going to keep on going, and we'll do, if there is no error, double ampersand, sfdx force data, bulk import, upsert. And what am I going to upsert? I am upserting the object type minus s is property, C. The file I'm going to use is updates. Did I spell it wrong? Oh, it doesn't exist yet, of course. Updates.csv. Let's make sure I spelled that right. Updates. Yep, that's good. And finally, the ID field I need is actually the ID. Should we see if it works? Are you excited? Sitting on the edge of your seats. Now, this is actually a bulk API call, so I have to go back and check. So first thing we'll do is we'll just make sure it completes. There we go, yes, completed. So now if I go back and I just repeat my initial query, there we go. With any luck, I should have my updated data. Woohoo! All right, so, all right. I'm just about out of time. So let's finish up. Well, that's beautiful, isn't it? Let's try again. There we go. I have a bunch of reference stuff to just throw at you, and you know, the slides, I'm going to put them up on SlideShare, and I will give you my SlideShare account so you can go look for them. I have a previous version of this that I've kind of given this over the last year, but I've updated a little bit, so you can go check it out there. Next thing, right? If this is interesting to you, if you want to learn more, go learn. There's tons of resources out there on the web, and the best thing I would suggest is use the Code Academy, Learn Your Command Line tutorial. It's really good. I went through it. I found it really valuable, even though, and what I'll say is I'm still learning this myself. You know, where I came from, I used command lines initially, I went away from them, and now I'm kind of relearning them because I never really learned Unix in the first place. There's a couple of other links on there I think that are interesting. As far as the stuff in this talk goes, like I said, I will post to SlideShare. If you're on Quip, this document should be public and available, and you can go take a look. That's actually my demo script. If you just want to see the things that I did, you're welcome to take a look. DX is available, so go sign up for a DevHuborg, get a trial org if you can't turn on the DevHuborg in your own. There's a couple of great sessions I want you to think about. Later on today, the Salesforce DX and Admin's Perspective session, you should check that out. And then Dave Carroll is giving the Mastering the Salesforce DX CLI talk a little bit later, where he goes into some of the details about the bash config for Salesforce DX and some of the cool things you can do around scripting. And I didn't really go into scripting, but Dave's talk does, so you should check that out. And then finally, of course, go do some Trailhead for Salesforce DX. There's some really great modules and a project on the Salesforce DX Trail, and it's counting up, so I'm over. Yeah. So I'm going to step outside, and if any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Okay? Thanks very much, everybody.